Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and I recently did a book versus miniseries video where I compared the book The Stand by Stephen King with the 1994 miniseries, and I have now since watched the 2020 adaptation, so in today's video I will be sharing my thoughts. And this 2020 adaptation was created by Josh Boone and Benjamin Cavill, and I will just say right off the bat that I actually really liked this TV show. Now, granted, I went into it with very low expectations because I feel like the general consensus, especially amongst Stephen King fans, is that this show is not very good. And so, yeah, I ended up being pleasantly surprised. Now, I will say I still have my complaints, and there are certain things that the 94 adaptation did better. But yeah, I still liked this. I enjoyed watching it. I found it engaging. It had a lot of tension. I liked the performances. And while it makes some plot changes, it still stays true to the overall story within the book. And I didn't put like a time constraint on like when I needed to finish this by, because sometimes with TV shows I will do that where it's like, okay, I gotta watch this 6-hour TV show in one day or something. Whereas this, I just watched it as I felt like it. And the last 3 episodes I watched in one sitting because I was just enjoying them that much. And I actually really liked episode 8. That was one of my favorite episodes. So yeah, I would actually recommend the show. But I will add the caveat that I had heard that the Trashcan Man portrayal in the 2020 adaptation was terrible, and there was a Reddit thread where someone shared the Godfather quote, "Look how they massacred my boy," in relation to Trashcan Man here. But even when I read that, at that point I was 3 episodes in and I was really enjoying it. So I was like, I probably will disagree with this commenter because I am liking the show more than most people at this point, so maybe I'll just totally disagree and I'll like trash in this TV show. However, that is not what ended up happening. For one, he doesn't even show up until I think it's episode 6. And so for one, I kept waiting for him to appear and I was just like, man, what? Like, why are we not introduced to Trash yet? He's a huge character. But then when we are introduced to him finally, like, it was bad. They ruined this character and I was so disappointed. Not only did they cut down his character story a ton, the performance was also terrible. So given how bad Ezra Miller was, I was glad not to see much of Trash, but he was such a fascinating character in the book. And so I wish that either they cast someone else or that the director gave Miller different direction. Like, I don't know who's more to blame, Ezra Miller or the creators and the directors, And so I wish they either cast someone else or gave different direction. That way we could have seen Trash's full story. This was the biggest disappointment as far as this 2020 adaptation goes. But the second biggest disappointment is Nick and Tom, who I will be talking about later. But yeah, so I have my complaints, and yet at the end of the day, I would still recommend this TV show. But from here on out, it is time to get into the details of the story, which means there will be spoilers going forward. And I will begin with my general thoughts and some more general changes that were made. And then from there, I will get into the details of each character one by one. And this will be broken up into the timestamps down below so you can jump around as you see fit. And speaking of jumping around, this story, the book is told linearly, and yet this adaptation chose to jump around in time. So we go from, them in Boulder cleaning up the bodies and then jumping back in time to before the virus even happened. And I actually really liked this method of storytelling. I will say, though, they spend much more time with the story once everyone is in Boulder or Las Vegas, more so than in sharing the details of their travel. And in some ways I didn't mind because I personally found the second half of the book much more interesting than the first half. So I wanted more of the Boulder, Las Vegas stuff anyway. And yet, having said that, certain important details were cut, like Larry and Nadine having a romance, which she shuts down, Trashcan's journey, and then they cut out the character of Lucy, who Larry and Nadine meet along their journey, and Larry and Lucy begin a romance. And so she's just not even in the story at all. And we also don't spend as much time with Nick or Tom as I would have liked. And because they cut some of these things out, certain events that happen later on, they aren't as emotional or impactful due to the fact that we didn't get these important moments early on that made us feel attached to these characters, And so I do think the show suffered in some ways by cutting so much from the first half. And then while people do dream of Randall Flagg and Mother Abigail, they don't seem to have other psychic feelings, aka the shine, like they do in the book. And here, Franny has a feeling Harold is up to something, but I wouldn't call that the shine. And the reason she knows the bomb exists is because she breaks into his house and sees his plans. Whereas in the book, she sensed that something was wrong, right? And that's why she tells people to get out of the house. And then Joe in the book, he has knowing feelings and he has maybe not premonitions, but he knows things. Whereas here in the show, we get a little glimpse of that, but they just did not focus on this aspect of the story at all. And also people in the book, they knew that Randall's group was in Vegas. And I think they also knew about the crucifixions that were happening because they were dreaming about it. Whereas here, they don't know people are in Las Vegas or what is happening there until a guy from Las Vegas shows up in Boulder. So I really wish they had people have these psychic shining abilities like they did in the book, because I really liked that. And then speaking of Vegas, so another big complaint I had is the portrayal of New Vegas here in the TV show, because in the book, the people in Vegas, they were fearful of Flagg and there were bad things happening, right? Like they were killing people, killing people for being deceptive or deceiving Randall Flagg, whether it was warranted or not. Often it wasn't, and so it wasn't a great place to be. And yet the people themselves, they were more normal. And when Tom and Dana go over there, Tom specifically, I remember reading how he had people he was friends with and that he liked, and he was building connections. And he was like, wow, these people aren't that different than the people in Boulder. And he liked them, And so they weren't bad people necessarily, right? They were just under the influence and choosing to be with Randall Flagg, but it wasn't necessarily because they were just inherently violent people. Whereas in the TV show, New Vegas is shown to be this incredibly hedonistic group who love participating in violence and sex to excessive lengths. And they have these gory fights taking place on a regular basis. And when Tom is there, his job is cleaning up these bodies. And Flagg even says to them at one point, oh, in the past, you were shamed for your love of sex and violence, but now you can indulge as much as you want. And that's the point of being here. And so it was just so over the top and ridiculous and just almost cartoonish. Whereas in the book, a lot of the Vegas people were far more complex and not just these straight up violent, depraved people the way they are portrayed here. So I just was not a fan of that at all. But by the way, speaking of Las Vegas, so oftentimes Stephen King books, they take place in places I have never been. Last year we went to Maine and we actually went to a gun quit. And Franny, she is from a gun quit. So I did think that was cool because I was like, hey, we stopped there, for a couple hours, maybe 1 hour. It wasn't that long. It was crazy busy. But anyway, so I have been to a gun quit at this point. But generally, I've never been to Colorado. Up until last year, I'd never been to Maine. I've never been to Florida. And those are the main states I feel like his books take place in, with some exceptions. But I have lived in Las Vegas and I, grew up in the Southwest area. And so I did like that this book has so much happen in that area and in Las Vegas specifically, because while reading the book or watching the show, it was just fun to see a place that I've lived. And in honor of the Southwest, I have my cactus shirt. And then also, Randall Flagg has his smiley face button, which the expression changes throughout the show based on his mood, which I really liked. So I printed this off and taped it on my shirt to be on theme, But now it is time to talk about the characters specifically, and I'm going to begin with one of my favorite characters from the book, one of my favorite characters to read about, and also a character that the show actually does do an excellent job with, and that is Harold Lauder. So in the show, he is a huge character in the show. He is very prominently featured up until episode 7 when he dies. And I liked how much they focused on him, and the actor does a fantastic job. And we see how his parents and people in town treated him and how he felt unwanted and forgotten. And we see how he harbors a love for Franny and is turned down when she gets with Stu instead. I mean, she turns him down even before they meet Stu. She was never interested in him, right? But then the fact that Stu comes in and steals her away from Harold, yeah, he's just filled with so much hate and jealousy at the way things have turned out. And we also see in this show how he has a photo of Tom Cruise that he looks at as a way to practice a fake enthusiastic smile, which I thought was a nice touch. And in the book, we have the tension surrounding, Franny's journal, which Harold reads, and then Franny breaks into Harold's house, which Harold finds out about, and then later Franny and Larry break into Harold's house. And so there's just so much suspense with Harold. And in the TV show, we don't get those specific events happening, but instead, Franny distracts Harold by inviting him to dinner so that Larry can break into Harold's house. And I really liked this segment of the show, and it gave me the suspense that I felt was lacking in the 94 adaptation. And we also see here how Harold had set up security cameras. And so even though Larry wasn't caught, Harold sees him on the video anyway. And he also, when he comes home, he sees the chess piece that was put back facing the wrong direction. And this definitely seemed like it was a nod to the movie Misery when Annie Wilkes sees that the penguin isn't facing north, which I always thought was such a great detail in that movie. And then we also see here how after they set off the bomb, he and Nadine are on their way to Vegas when he crashes his bike. And in the TV show, it seems like Nadine is the one who causes this, right? Like it totally is her that causes him to crash his bike. Whereas in the book, it was Randall Flagg that caused him to crash. But as he dies after his crash, he writes his final words, which as in the book, he signs Hawk, a nickname that was given to him while being on the body crew in Boulder. And speaking of this, so he becomes good friends with Teddy, and Teddy is who gives him this nickname. And I loved their friendship in the show, and we see how this kindness and openness from Teddy is kind of the only link Harold has left to being good. However, in the show, Teddy comes upon Harold and Nadine at one point, and Nadine shoots Teddy, which was very sad. And we also see here that, as in the book, Harold leaves signs along their route and Larry follows them and he looks up to Harold because of this. And then we also get the scene where when Larry arrives in Boulder, he goes to see Harold and there is some uneasiness there, but I felt like that scene in the book was just so good. So the TV show didn't quite live up to the book equivalent. But also I liked that when Larry and his group, when they are going to Vegas near the end, they find Harold's body and Larry is the one that goes down to his body and, pays his respects and he covers it up. And so I just liked this continuing connection between Larry and Harold. But yeah, I loved what they did with Harold in this TV show. I thought they did a fantastic job. Again, the actor was incredible. And so even though they do make some changes here and there, yeah, I thought they did a great job with him. And to go along with Harold, it is now time to talk about Nadine. So aside from leaving out things that related to Larry and her and Larry's back and forth road trip romance, I do like what they did with her here as well. We see her conflict and her internal conflict between good and evil. And we see her try to get Larry to have sex with her, whereas here, there is no Lucy. So instead, Larry says no because he's just man, this isn't you, this isn't how you talk, what is going on here? And he's just very uncomfortable with how she's behaving. And then also though, another even bigger reason maybe is the fact that this is when Larry was supposed to go break into Harold's house. Franny has just given him the go ahead. And so he also doesn't have sex with her because he's I gotta go break into Harold's house right now. But then I also like the part when she meets Randall and initially, he puts her in a trance. So they're in the desert, which was the case in the book. But here, he makes her hallucinate thinking they are in Vegas. And so initially she is into it, but then partway through she realizes, the spell is starting to break and she's wait, something is wrong. This is not right. And this is when, she sees Randall's true self. But then afterwards, the next day, we see her as being beautiful and everything is all good. But again, it's because Randall has her in a trance. But every now and then, something will break her from this trance and she feels that something is very, very wrong. And we also see that she becomes very pregnant very quickly. And, I'm fine with her demon baby growing at an insanely fast pace. Because when we're talking about the supernatural, they don't have to abide by the laws of nature. But eventually, we, the audience, see her true self, and she is not as glamorous as she thinks she looks. And instead, she's just incredibly sickly and just looks like she is on the brink of death. And Nadine is also still alive by the time the three from Boulder arrive in Vegas, and she is the one who greets them. Again, thinking she looks beautiful, not realizing she looks like death. And at one point she speaks with Larry one-on-one, and he shows her her reflection. And previously she had seen her reflection, but again, because of this spell, she saw herself as looking beautiful. And so I think in this moment, when she's faced with her reflection, it's because Larry is here, someone who truly cares about her and who is wanting her to see the truth. And so in this moment, she does see her true self, and she is shocked and disturbed. However, she then starts to go into labor, and so she is taken up to the penthouse. And while up there, she again keeps saying, like, this isn't right, this isn't right. And she realizes that she was never meant to live after giving birth. And from here, she then uses the power of Flagg's magic stone to break the glass, and she jumps to her death. And I know a lot of these details with her in Vegas, like, they are unique to this TV show, because in the book, very soon after they arrive in Vegas, she kills herself, whereas here she's around a bit longer. And I thought she died too soon in the book. And so I actually love the changes they made with her here by having her around longer and having her be in this trance. And then also the fact that, like, you know, this demon baby she's giving birth to, it's more of a threat here, right? Because she almost does give birth. And so, yeah, I just thought they did a great job with this character. Again, showing her internal battle between good versus evil. But also, I like here how we see the competitive nature between her and Harold, which again, that's unique to the show, I would say. But I love how they're competitive into, like, who does Flagg need more, right? And so I like how Flagg instills this competitive nature within them. And then also when God intervenes in Las Vegas, in the end, the thunder and lightning storm is able to get inside through a hole in the glass ceiling Nadine made when she committed suicide. And I'm sure God could have found a way in no matter what, but I just love the fact that it was Nadine's sacrifice that made the hole that God was able to come through. And then I also wanted to talk about Glenn. I didn't spend very much time on him in my previous video, but he is in the group that goes to Vegas in the end. And in the book, they are all in their separate cells. And in the book, Lloyd and Randall go talk to Glenn face to face. And Glenn, like, he mocks Randall and he laughs at him because he realizes how insubstantial Flagg is, right? And how he doesn't have as much power as he thinks he does. And so Randall is, of course, very upset by this. So he tells Lloyd to shoot Glenn, which Lloyd does. Whereas in the TV show, they changed this because they put on a mock trial for the three from Boulder. And Randall, he is not there in person. He is watching through a video camera. And during this trial, Glenn stands up to Lloyd. And then it is this other Vegas lady who is pretending to be the judge. She tells Lloyd to shoot Glenn, and Lloyd hesitates. And Glenn rightly suspects that Lloyd has never killed anyone before. And he tells him, like, you don't need to start now. But then he says, I'm not begging for my life, mind you. I'm begging for yours. And Lloyd does end up shooting him. But I loved this line from Glenn because in the context of this book, you know, God exists and clearly there is an afterlife. So we know that Glenn will be okay if he dies, right? And he dies such a valiant death in all versions. But yeah, we know he's going to be okay. And so when he's saying, I'm not begging for my life, I'm begging for yours, it's because Lloyd, his mortal life, like committing murder, like what that does to you as a person is horrible, right? But then also like Lloyd's soul is at stake because what kind of afterlife will he go to if he just continues staying on this path with Randall, you know? And so yeah, I loved this part of the show, and I am also a huge fan of Greg Kinnear, and I love seeing him in anything. But I will say though, as much as I love this scene and as much as I love Greg Kinnear, in the book, it was awesome seeing Glenn stand up to Randall face to face, right? So like literally, you know, Randall, the walking dude right here. Whereas in the TV show, Randall is on a video camera. And so I kind of wish we had this powerful moment between the two of them face to face. And yet at the same time, I do kind of like what we see in the show still. But also when they arrive in Vegas, Glenn also says how the people here aren't that different from Boulder. They are just lost people who are with Flagg because he makes them feel a little less lost. And this was also a line that I liked in the TV show. And then also I wanted to mention that in the book, Glenn is the first person to say, I will fear no evil, as they are walking to Vegas. And Glenn, he had been, you know, so philosophical and he was atheist or agnostic. And so the fact that we see him kind of do a 180, I just loved his character arc in that way. But speaking of I will fear no evil, I did want to talk about Larry for a bit, because here we do have the character of Rita, who commits suicide. She is played by Heather Graham, by the way. However, I felt like Larry was not dislikable enough in this TV show. Like, yeah, we see he's addicted to drugs and alcohol, and he's difficult during his last concert, and his relationship with his mom is rocky, but he just was not selfish and rude enough, especially with Rita, and so her death didn't feel painful enough in my mind. And I like him once he is meant to be good anyway, and they're in Boulder, but I just wish we saw more of a dramatic arc from him. But his final moments with Ray when they are underwater before they die, I thought that was just absolutely beautiful. And then again, I do really like how he talks to Nadine, right? And he helps her snap out of this trance she is in. And so on one hand, I loved this character in the TV show and I loved the actor. And so I just wish they made him more dislikable in the beginning. That way his arc would be all the more satisfying. And now on to Lloyd, Randall Flagg's right-hand man. So again, this is something based on a comment that I got on my previous video. I know there are people who really dislike the way Lloyd is portrayed in this adaptation because they are definitely doing something very different with him. And I will admit that here, Lloyd, he is not tough at all. He is actually kind of goofy and he is incredibly spineless. But I liked this portrayal. I liked that they were trying something different, and for me, it worked. And also, a big change here is that in this version, before he is arrested, he is with Poke, this guy that he, did crimes with. And Poke is telling Lloyd to shoot someone, or Poke will shoot Lloyd if he doesn't. However, Poke then ends up being shot, and Lloyd is sent to prison. And so we see that Lloyd was being manipulated, right? And maybe under the influence of Poke. But it's interesting because in the book, Lloyd is arrested and Poke and everybody that he was with at this incident, they have died. And so he's with a lawyer, and the lawyer is suggesting that Lloyd claim that Poke was forcing him to do these things, right? And so Lloyd, he's kind of slow on the uptake, and so he doesn't get what the lawyer is implying. But basically the lawyer is like, everyone that was there is dead except you, so you can claim whatever you want. And if you claim that Poke was forcing you into this, you'll get a lesser sentence because of it. And so here in the TV show, they take this, this fake situation and they make it be the truth for him. And yeah, so I thought this was, I kind of liked this change because they took something from the book and just kind of changed it and applied it in their own way. And then also the fact that Lloyd here has never killed anyone, it gives us that great scene later on between he and Glenn, which I loved. But we see in this version how shaken Lloyd becomes after the death of Nadine and seeing the strong character and lack of fear in Larry and Ray. And then as Larry repeats, I will fear no evil, others in the crowd also begin saying it. And this, of course, infuriates Flagg. And Lloyd is then going to uncuff Larry and Ray and save them because he is finally having a change of heart and he finally has the guts to do what is right. But then, of course, God interferes and kills everybody, including Lloyd. Whereas, yeah, in the book, he kind of, he was committed to Randall, right? They made that deal when Lloyd was in prison. And so he kind of is like, this is the choice I've made, and he basically sticks with it until the end. And so this is a big change from the book. And yet I liked what they did here. I like Lloyd in the book, but I also like this show just for what it is, doing its own thing. I really liked the actor who played Lloyd. I thought he was funny, but then also I thought his moments when he's truly feeling shaken and is having a change of heart, I thought the actor did a really great job in those moments. And then also I wanted to mention that here, Julie Laurie is Lloyd's girlfriend, which was not the case in the book. And now on to the walking dude himself, Randall Flagg. So here in the show, we really see how Randall, he gets his power from people being in fear of him. And so the more people who fear him, the more power he has, And it kind of reminded me of Tinkerbell in that way. But in the final moment, as Larry and Ray are saying, I will fear no evil, and others in the crowd begin saying this as well, Flagg is angry and feels his power weaken. And then a storm cloud enters the building they are in, and the lightning bolts are killing people and destroying things before then hitting the bomb, which leads it all to explode. But before this, Flagg is directly hit multiple times and he seems to be killed. But it's interesting, an interesting change is that in the book, Randall sets out an electric orb to kill someone, and then this orb turns into the hand of God, that causes the explosion. Whereas here, the hand of God arrives through the thunder and the lightning, and it had nothing to do with what Randall was putting out. And so I did think in the book, it was some nice poetic justice that it was something Randall created that led to the destruction of New Vegas. And so it would have been nice if the show could have included that in some way. And yet this is episode 8. And so this one was my favorite. So ultimately, even with the changes, I don't have too many complaints because I still like how things went down. And of course, even though it appears Randall has been killed, you can't truly kill him, and he does return in episode 9. And then the show ends like the book because the very last scene is Randall showing up on an island, and the people who live there, he gets them to fear and worship him. And so he gains all of this power, and that's exactly how the book ends. And yeah, it's the last scene of the TV show. But yeah, again, I really liked Alexander Skarsgård in this role. I thought he did a great job. I also liked how he starts to take on an Elvis look with the popped collar and the hairstyle, since he's in Vegas, where Elvis reigned for a little while. And he is also playing the song Suspicious Minds when Dana comes in to be questioned, which, I mean, that's a fantastic song. I love that. So I love that they included it. But then also the music choices were always very fitting. Maybe at times they were a bit too on the nose, and yet at the same time I can appreciate that they found songs that just perfectly fit what was happening in the moment. And then also, so the way they're going to kill Larry and Ray here is they have them handcuffed to the bottom of a pool and they're just waiting for it to fill up. So while they're waiting for it to fill up, Randall puts music on and then he starts dancing. And I thought this was funny, and I liked this part too. I will say though, when we see, Randall's true self, I thought they did a better job in the 94 version with the makeup and the practical effects, because here with the CGI, I just didn't think he looked as creepy. Whereas, the makeup in the 90s adaptation, I was very impressed with. And now to talk about Nick and Tom. So Nick and Tom are just such incredible characters. They were my 2 favorite. Like I say in the previous video, my favorite characters to read about were Harold and Nadine, but my favorite characters, like the best people who I was just like, you're amazing, it was Tom Cullen and Nick, and so to lump the 2 of them just together here feels wrong because they're both so incredible and they deserve their own segments. But the reason I am lumping them together is because each of them did not get nearly enough screen time in this adaptation. When Nick dies, I almost didn't even care because he was not featured enough throughout the show. And we see he teams up with Tom, and yet their friendship is not developed at all in the way I wanted. And Nick isn't even the one who suggests Tom be the spy. And when Tom shows up to help Stu in the end, we don't even see their journey back to Boulder, which means we also don't see Ghost Nick coming to visit Tom. And Nick and Tom were 2 of my favorites, so this was just such a huge disappointment that they did not get the time they deserved. And the 2020 actors, I thought I didn't have an issue with the performances necessarily. However, I think just all around, I prefer what the 94 adaptation did with Nick and Tom. It gave them the time they deserved. And then also, I do like the actor who plays Tom in the 94 adaptation, and thanks to a comment I got on my previous video, I learned that this actor is the same guy who voices Patrick Star in SpongeBob, which I thought was kind of funny. And then I guess I don't have too much to say about Franny and Stu because I liked their performances and they stayed close enough to the book when it came to them, I would say. Once again, we focus more on them in Boulder than we do on the stuff before, but I did want to mention one scene in particular, which is when Stu has broken his leg, and so they leave him behind on their way to Vegas. And again, as in the book, Kojak the dog helps Stu survive by bringing him food. In year 2, we get a scene where Stu is debating overdosing on pills and just ending his life. However, he looks over and Kojak is right there laying beside him, looking at him. And so just Kojak's presence helps him to resist ending his life. And so I love that too. It was just so sweet. And I love that Kojak saves Stu's life in more ways than one. But the main thing I want to say in regard to Franny and Stu has to do with the ending. So in the end of the book, Franny tells Stu that she wants to go back to Maine. And so that is how the book ends. Whereas in the TV show, we see them leave and head to Maine. And they stop in Nebraska on their journey. And Nebraska is where Mother Abigail lived in the book. And it seems like they happen to stop at Mother Abigail's former home. Although maybe this isn't quite clear because in the TV show, there is no stop in Nebraska. Mother Abigail was in Colorado right from the start. But it seems that maybe she spent her childhood in Nebraska, I guess we could assume. But yeah, so they stop at this house in Nebraska, and Stu leaves to go to town while Franny stays back at the house that they are in. And she ends up falling into a well, and while on the brink of death in the well, like her spirit goes to the afterlife or like some middle life. And at first she sees Flagg, and he shows her how she is dying and says that her daughter will also die unless she kisses him and allows him to basically possess her from time to time. But she tells him no, and then she says, "Not for my daughter, not for Stu, not for the world." And I loved this line so much because even at the risk of your own daughter dying, your own baby girl, it is not worth it to make a deal with the devil, right? Literally or figuratively. And so I just love that she has the fortitude to not give in to the temptation, right? Because Flagg can be very persuasive, and he makes it pretty clear that she is going to die. And then also because she is dying, it will lead to her daughter dying because no one is there to watch her because Stu has a flat tire. And so it's very tempting, right? And you almost couldn't blame her if she did agree to it, right? And yet, again, she has the strength to say no, even if it does risk her daughter dying, even if it does mean her dying. But not only that, she also knows that Flagg lies. And so she knows better than to just believe what he is showing her. And then from here, she sees Mother Abigail, who tells her that life is about struggle and how we need to be true and to stand. But also, Mother Abigail also tells her that she knows Franny will live a long life and that everything will be okay. And then from here, Stu comes back to see Franny in the well, and then with the help of a mysterious young girl, they pull Franny up, and then the girl heals Franny, and then she disappears. And from here, they make their way to Maine safely. And initially, I wasn't quite sure who this young girl was. Like, it's heavily implied that it is like a young Mother Abigail. So she is it like her angel, her spirit comes here in this moment just to save them? That's what I assume. And yet at the same time, I think ultimately it doesn't really matter what the specifics are in regards to this girl, because ultimately she's just a messenger from God who has been sent to bless Franny and Stu in this moment, right? For their faith, and also to bless Franny for standing up to Randall Flagg. And I felt kind of conflicted about this final episode because I loved the showdown between Franny and Randall Flagg. I thought it was incredible and I absolutely loved it. And yet at the same time, I felt like this episode felt unnecessary and it was just tacked on here at the end. And so I felt conflicted. But I will admit, I felt less conflicted once I read that Stephen King himself wrote this final episode. And turns out this is an ending for Stu and Franny that had been in his head for a long time. And thanks to this TV show, he finally got to put it out into the world. So now that I know that, that swayed me in the direction of liking this episode. And I think it's cool that he finally got to add this ending. Again, that has been in his head for a while now, apparently. But before I wrap up, I need to talk about Trashcan Man, who you already know I dislike him in this adaptation. But here, so he shows up in Vegas and Randall tells him, like, hey, go get me an atomic bomb and then come back here and attach it to an airplane. However, when Trashcan is coming back, he's not thinking clearly and he instead takes the bomb directly to Randall, where they are, doing the executions. And so it is hit by lightning and this causes the explosion. Whereas in the book, Trashcan brought the bomb to Randall as a way to make amends and to be forgiven for having blown up the planes earlier. And so, yeah, we get like maybe 10 minutes of screen time with Trash in this adaptation, which is a travesty because again, he was a great character. He was so interesting and I felt bad for him in so many ways, and we just don't get any of that. And so again, huge disappointment and also just a horrible portrayal done by Ezra Miller. But I will say they did do a decent job making him look sufficiently gross when he is affected by the nuclear energy. But again, I really liked the way the 94 adaptation portrayed this too, because I did think they had great special effects special effects, practical effects, makeup. And then I also wanted to shout out J.K. Simmons, who plays the military commander who sees the virus taking over and ends up committing suicide. And here, Stu ends up meeting him, which was not the case in the book. But also something I liked about the show is that the doctor at this facility, he becomes friends with Stu, whereas in the book, he tries to shoot Stu. And so I did like that change, where they are on friendly terms and see themselves as equals. And then speaking of the virus, they also did a good job with the effects with the virus. In the book, we hear that their necks get get swollen and there's all this mucus. And so this adaptation did a really good job at showing that and making it very gross. And then I didn't really talk about Mother Abigail much, but I liked Whoopi Goldberg in the role. But one change that I do want to mention is that here in this adaptation, when she goes into the woods, she's only there for like one day. Whereas in the book, she was there for so long. And in the TV show, when they sent spies to Las Vegas, she hears about it and is upset with them. Whereas in the book, when they sent spies to Las Vegas, Mother Abigail was in the woods and she wasn't around to be consulted about it. And so ultimately, I guess I'm kind of neutral on her portrayal here as far as like her sticking around longer. But yeah, anyway, I liked her. I thought they did a decent job. And yeah, when it comes to, the two adaptations and the book, I of course prefer the book over both adaptations. But between the 94 show and the 2020 show, I mean, the 94 show did a better job with Trashcan, with Nick, with Tom. They did a great job with the makeup and the practical effects. And yet, even so, I prefer the 2020 adaptation. I really liked it. Whether you agree or disagree, I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. But yeah, I was kind of surprised how much I actually enjoyed this. And I did wonder, I would love to know when you watched the show, because I wonder if people who dislike it, if part of the reason is because if you watched this in 2020 when it aired or in 2021, I feel like that was a bad time to watch this because, our own pandemic was so fresh, right? And so I feel like this wasn't the right time to be watching a show like this. And so for people who watched it at the time and didn't like it, I wonder if that's partly why, is like where our head was due to the pandemic, And so I think I benefited from not watching it until 5 years later, and it's not so fresh for me. So yeah, anyway, that's just a theory I have as to why maybe some people dislike this so much. But if you watched it last year and you still disliked it, your opinions, of course, are still very valid. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.